Hello, and welcome to the ECR Retail Loss, Sell More and Lose Less podcast series. My name is Colin Peacock. I work with a community of experts and academics who are keen to share their latest research findings and best practices. And every week or two in this series, I'll be joined by one of those experts and academics to discuss some of the very latest insights from our meetings and discussions and research on best practices. This week I'm joined by Professor Emmeline Taylor. Emmeline has done some outstanding work for ECR, most recently in the Fortress Store report. This week we're looking at internal staff dishonesty and the role that communications can play in reducing internal theft. Good afternoon, Emmeline. How are you?
Hi, Colin. I'm great, thank you. How are you?
Very good. Well, I seem to see you now more on the TV or on the radio or in the newspapers these days than in person.
I know, I'm sorry about that.
Yes, you're a little media superstar. But yeah, that's great. Some great messaging you're putting out there. So thank you for that. Hey, look, we had a session on internal theft. We have sessions on internal theft all the time. It's one of those things that attracts a lot of attention. It's a really difficult one for retailers to talk about, think about, contextualize, quantify. But the session was a couple of weeks ago now. We had 43 retailers show up on it. And our focus, I suppose, was around less about sort of, how do you create a company where you have no internal theft? More about, what should be some of the strategies and around communication and whether you communicate and advertise the risk of being caught, and some of the nuances around that in terms of the target audience, but also the cultural, niceties of organisations, if I may say so. We have in mind that we might do a project with some marketing students and unleash some of their creativity. So that was kind of also in the sort of preamble to all this. But I'm really keen to hear what your notes were, what you took away from the meeting, and what might be the actionable points for retailers to sort of like sit down and think about and say, oh, maybe I should consider this. Because actually the feedback we got from the end of the session was probably some of the more positive feedback that we had ever. We did start off with a really great presentation from a retailer who had actually been an academic and actually written his thesis on internal theft and the advertising of it, the risks of it anyway. So go on, I've rambled on too long.
Yeah, no, it was a really interesting session, and I'm not surprised the feedback as well was so positive, because there were so many sort of actionable points that were being shared around what businesses are doing when they know or when they uncover a particular theft issue internally. There were some really key learnings for me, and it couldn't be more timely because we're beginning to see more focus on staff honesty. As you and I know, customer theft and internal theft usually vie for the top spot in terms of which contributes the highest proportion to a business's loss. So the presentation that we had started to really drill down into what could be contributing towards staff dishonesty. It's a really hard area to research as well, because quite often somebody who's committed theft might be dismissed and no further action taken. So we lose that visibility of who they were and why they did it. And so the overview of the research that we were given was quite a clever methodology, really. It was looking to ask employees not about their own behaviour, but about their colleagues. So the demographics, who do you think within the business is committing internal theft? And that really threw up some quite interesting things. And I'd argue the opposite of what we might presume. So it seemed to be that from these surveys, people believed that it was members of staff who'd been in the job for longer and perhaps were older that were more likely to be committing dishonest acts. And actually, it's the young people who tend to get caught. It's not necessarily that they reflect those that are actually committing offences. And the speaker talked about, we probably know about 5% of individuals. So trying to construct any sort of response based on 5% is probably going to be problematic, because you won't be speaking to the vast majority. There was a lot of talk as well about what can encourage and discourage staff to commit offences. And sometimes there's overlap there as well. So what could encourage somebody if we're thinking about organisational factors rather than their own personal circumstances? It can be that culture. You know, it's very hard to sort of pinpoint what a culture means, but one that might support staff dishonesty. So, you know, encouraging it, giving a sense that everybody's doing it, not having like good inventory, good systems, good supervision. And then also the factors that discourage are the flip side of that. So workplace norms that, you know, show a heightened level of risk, that there's close monitoring. You know, there's other staff members who are likely to blow the whistle if they were to become aware of staff dishonesty. So there was lots of different things that through the discussion, we then encapsulated as the impression of control. And I just thought that was a really nice way of capturing all the different processes, management styles that might take place, to give staff this view that, you know, this is high risk. And so, you know, the likelihood is that you will be caught. I know that we talked about this advertising campaign as well. So I think that'd be really interesting to trial in different businesses. There was a lot of discussion as to whether an advertising campaign should appeal to somebody's morality. So going back to the findings from that research around whether it's older people or people who've been in the job for longer that would be more likely to be dishonest. They may have learned the systems, or over time they've found a vulnerability that they're going to exploit. And what might motivate them to deter from dishonest behaviour might be things like, imagine, you know, what your family would think. You know, you might have social norms as well that you don't want to be classed as an offender. Whereas what might appeal to a different cohort could be a different messaging, and that could be more around punishments. So I think that idea around advertising campaign appealing to different motivations is really important. So, you know, do we go for the fear factor, or do we appeal to somebody's sense of morality and potentially their sort of social status? So I'd be really excited to see what comes.
I get quite excited. I used to be a marketing director, so this idea of sort of creating these personas and these messages that pick up on the sort of you know, these values is really interesting. We had some discussion around some of the retailers that run a campaign and got some results. We will take away soon. There were some quite interesting findings, I thought.
Yeah, and I think some of the language around that as well, around is it worth it? So particularly appealing to, you know, that sort of really that view of low level theft, you know, of maybe stealing a sandwich, for example. So really sort of, you know, appealing to people that, you know, is that really worth losing your job over, or how people might view you? And that seemed to have some quite effective outcomes.
Yeah, no, the numbers on the losses of sandwiches, I think they saw a 25% reduction in the losses of sandwiches. But even the speaker, I think, sort of alluded to some, again, double-digit improvements in losses as a consequence of this sort of advertising program that they'd run, which, again, highly impressive.
I think it has to be very carefully thought through as well, because what you don't want to do is point the finger at hardworking, sort of honest staff and give this view of, yeah, exactly, you know, give this view of sort of surveillance and suspicion, and that, you know, everybody is a potential thief. That's not good for staff morale, particularly at a time when we know it's really difficult to recruit and retain staff. So, you know, this advertising campaign, you know, as you said, you know, you've come from a marketing background. How do you sort of convey that, you know, we're talking to everybody, but we're not pointing the finger at everybody? And that's really going to be the key to any successful campaign.
Yeah, no, we certainly heard about one retailer that was really, really concerned about doing this, and they thought, well, maybe I could get away with a blitz, you know, maybe I could do a sort of 8-week blitz, which I thought was quite an interesting approach, just sort of not every day of the year. But I mean, it still has to get that balance right. You're right, you don't want to be accusing every hardworking manager of being a thief. You know, that's clearly something you want to totally avoid. So it does require some, you know, careful thought. And it's perhaps, within the gift of every retailer to almost go to their marketing department and say to the marketing team, how would you, figure out who the personas are in our organization that we need to target? What could those messages be? What could the media be? We heard about the power of the back of a loo, didn't we? Of a cubicle.
Apparently, the best place to advertise is the back of a toilet door. Who knew? But I think, in terms of that blitz, I think, advertising campaigns can very quickly become sort of wallpaper. You don't notice them anymore. So I think a blitz is absolutely right, particularly where that you've got a hotspot of activity, then begin to, give those messages, I think, at that point. Otherwise, in evaluations, we quite often talk about the honeymoon period. So you have an impact very quickly when something is initially launched, and then it does begin to sort of tail off. At that point, you stop the campaign and, have a break from it, because otherwise the messaging, I think, is just lost.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting. I mean, there's so many clues out there, certainly, but I mean, they're all a bit ad hoc. But we heard about one retailer that's launched, a new remote monitoring service, and that was able to actually be paid for by the impact on shrink. We heard one retailer share that they were just about to sort of declare a store, into the most at-risk measures, I suppose, the Ofsted equivalent of being a bad store. And before they'd even made any single intervention or even visited the store to try to understand, there'd been a change. The store realised that they were under the microscope. So we've got lots and lots of clues that tell us that, done the right way, in the right form, at the right frequency, I think advertising could play a very interesting role here. Advertising communicating the risk. So very exciting.
Do you know, there was a study that was done in Australia. I think it was the Institute of Criminology that did it, and a lot of these studies involve sweets. It seems to be like the most the best way to test whether somebody's honest or not. Will they help themselves to a couple of free chocolates? And so what they did is they had a bowl of chocolates. It was supposed to be an honesty box that you paid money as a donation, and then you could take like a candy bar. And they realized people were taking the candy without giving the donation. And so as an experiment, they simply put a pair of eyes above the honesty box, and they found just through that really simple step, people were then more willing to actually pay for the chocolate they were taking. And I think that potentially, that sort of psychology of feeling like you're being watched, that impression of control, even if there's no actual, consequence behind it, I think that speaks volumes in potentially what some of these campaigns could look to achieve.
Well, that's a great way to end. And I think actually underlines the message here that advertising could work if done well. Now, but you're actually going to hopefully do some research towards the back end of the year with us at ECR Retail Loss, and tell me a bit about what you want that research to go after and explore.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this because I think it's really growing in importance and it's moving up the agenda as well. So beginning to look at levels of staff dishonesty, really drilling into, well, who does it? Why do they do it? I can remember a previous study, decades ago now, and this was really about honest members of staff becoming dishonest. And it began to look at, well, what was the trigger point? What happened? And, it could be something in that individual's personal life, financial difficulties, or it could be, they got denied a promotion and they were disgruntled and began to then defraud their business. I think there's a shift in the offender profile now, because I think we're seeing more individuals target the retail supply chain with the view to steal. And that's very different from going from being honest to dishonest. We've got people with ill intentions who are managing to get jobs and then committing theft at scale. And how do you begin to, what are the flashpoints for that? How do you notice that suspicious behaviour? Hopefully before you employ them, but if not, to spot it very quickly. And then what action should you take? So I think there's a huge exploratory piece around staff dishonesty, really beginning to dig deep into it. So I'm really looking forward to launching that, hopefully within a few months.
Yeah, and as you say, especially the retail context has changed so much, probably since the last time ECR did it, which I think goes back to 2005 or something where we last looked at it. So it's 20 years ago since we've last looked at it, and I think there probably is a recognition now. We've got buy online, pick up in store, and you've got fulfillment centres. You've got Richwood opportunity for theft, as you say, and perhaps a more sort of external risk has grown, and maybe even the sanctions are different. I think between stealing from a shop versus stealing from a distribution centre. So very interesting. We'll look at that. Well, thank you so much for your time and for the recap. Hopefully there's lots for people to go after here, and we'll see you next time.
Brilliant. Thanks, Colin. See you soon.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.
That's all we have time for this week. Thank you for joining us, and thanks to all the ECR retail loss community for the sharing of their knowledge, their research and latest learnings that ensure that we become truly a global platform for learning. My name is Colin Peacock. This is the Sell More and Lose Less podcast, and if you liked it, please subscribe so you automatically get all future episodes. And also, if you think your colleagues and friends might also like it, please ask them to follow ECR Retail Loss on LinkedIn and tune in to our next podcasts. If you didn't like it, then let us know and we'll try and fix it. Either way, see you next time. Thank you again.